What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, and we're back for some acid trance. And indeed, exactly the way I would describe this one depends on which of the two mixes we listen to, and I was really in two minds. They're both amazing, they both have a slightly different flavor, and I would be inclined to use them in slightly different styles of acid trance mixes. We're talking about a tune by, and I'm not sure because I did not spend the 90s in the UK and specifically in London, but the name Pendragon or Pendragon, I've heard it pronounced both ways, is, of course, an Arthurian name. It's a name that is prominent in the legend of King Arthur, but it's also the name of a London club night run by Mark Sinclair, who is part of a group that went by the name Pendragon or Pendragon. And I believe this is a name in which the membership was not always identical. In any case, this is a tune, as you can see, from Choci's Chewns. Mark McKenzie, I talked about him in reactions going back a couple years, as well as in the reaction I did for Dougie's Second Draw Down. But yes, this was his original label and one of the earliest UK acid trance labels, and it's one which has many records which are now highly coveted and quite pricey to get a good original copy of on Discogs. Fortunately, I have most of the catalog. I think there's a few here and there that I don't have, but I have dozens of Choci's Chewns records, as well as VCF and other sub-labels within his label output, like VCR, meaning Voltage Controlled Remixes, which is the remix label of VCF. In any case, as I said, there's two versions of Acid People on this record. There's Mark and Choci's mix, which again, Mark Sinclair and Choci, Mark McKenzie, and then there is the Mark Sinclair, Tafracan, and Choci mix. And I didn't know this back in the day, but doing a little bit of poking around on Discogs, it seems that Tafracan was a name used by one of the members of Pendragon, which is Dennis. So yes, to the best of my understanding, that means the second mix here is done by both of the Marks and a guy named Dennis, who was also in Pendragon, or Pendragon. So ultimately, I don't know all that much about the club night, but I do think hard trance and acid trance was the main style of music played there. Probably some acid techno too, because of the people they were associated with. But I am very aware that Pendragon's output as a producing group is largely in the hard trance / acid trance vein with a bit of a psy or tribal flavor. And in that regard, the Mark and Choci mix here is very much like hard acid trance in the mid to late 90s vein. The Mark, Tafracan, and Choci mix is acid trance but with a bit more of a psy flavor. So as I said, I went back and forth about which of these two mixes to start with, and I'll definitely come back and react to the other mix very soon. But I figured I'd start with the A side, or the logo side, because that's sort of like the side one of trance and techno releases. So we're going to listen to Mark and Choci's mix, which, as I said, has a bit of a more hard acid trance type of flavor. I have used both versions of this in many acid mixes going back now, well before I was even on YouTube. But certainly in the first part of my YouTube era, which is to say for the first 10 years or so I was on YouTube, I was basically just uploading DJ mixes. And for the first several years, it was like one or two a year right around the holidays. I did these holiday mixes. Then around 2016, I started doing a few series of video mixes like Hard House Chronicles and Acid Trance Sessions. And then I got back into doing that in late 21, 22. And that's in early 2022 is when I began doing reactions, and everything that has happened in the last few years came out of that. So ultimately, this is a track that has been in many mixes on my YouTube, but which I feel remiss for not having reacted to thus far. In the moment, I'm forgetting what year this is from. It doesn't say here. Give me one moment, because I had the Pendragon or Pendragon YouTube page out. So okay, so it's 1997, and oh, okay, so it says the vocal samples, including "Acid People," is taken from the Raga Twins' intro to "Lamborghini" by Shut Up and Dance. There you go. A little bit of trivia for you that I would not have been able to provide on my own, so thank you once again, Discogs. Anyway, this is, as I said, Pendragon or Pendragon's Acid People from 1997 on Choci's Chewns, and it's the Mark and Choci mix. I'm trying to remember the mixes where I've used this. I want to say Juggernaut is one of them. amazing. So again, the other version I think has a bit more of a psychedelic flavor, but there's still some of that here. But the kick drum and some of the synth work and the way the acid is incorporated, which again, there's some different acid stylings along the way. I love in the first breakdown in this one when we hear that big, almost like ancient Egyptian melody. I feel like that's the kind of melodic riff that is often used when, you know, there's a scene in some, you know, fictional entertainment in like ancient Egypt or the ancient world more broadly perhaps. But yeah, when that big sort of overarching riff comes in the first breakdown, and then after the first or second time around, it starts like pulsating with a very wicked acid line. I love that and the way it builds to the first major drop of the tune. But yes, in the other version, which I think is a bit faster, I think the tempo is slightly elevated in the other version, which again, I will come back and react to very soon. It has just a bit more of a psychedelic flavor, whereas here it's a bit like tribal hard trance, which is very on brand for Pendragon or Pendragon. They have made a number of tunes. I'm thinking it's like Mind Seti. I think that's not how you pronounce it, but I think it's like a Celtic phrase, which I think Mark Sinclair is like, I think that's kind of his vibe, like, you know, Celtic tribal sort of stylings in his trance and acid music. Yeah, I don't know if I reacted to that. If I haven't, I should come back and do it, but I feel like maybe I have. In any case, the other version, as I said, it's a bit faster, it's a bit more psychedelic, and the main Egyptian sort of riff, it has a bit different configuration. It's the same riff, but the way they fine-tune it is a bit different. So I really don't know which version I prefer. Again, this version I would use in a more like driving, hard acid trance kind of set. The flip side I might use in an acid set, which maybe has a bit of psychedelic flavoring in it, or, you know, is closer to a Goa trance mix without being fully Goa. So yeah, ultimately these are the kind of like decisions and categorizations you eventually make as a longtime DJ of acid music. And in that regard, before we end the video, let me just confirm that this mix is used in Juggernaut, because I really think it is. Okay, Smokescreen. And in fact, this may be a bit ambiguous because I think I'm searching here by the title of the track, and ultimately it'll come up for both versions. So yeah, Living in the Sky, the Red Pill. Yeah, it's definitely in the Red Pill, one of the versions. The Sojourn, I love that mix. It's a very old mix of mine, but I do enjoy it. Smokescreen, Open Question. I guess we're about to find out if it's in Juggernaut. I can search here in YouTube Studio, and let us see. Oh, it says I can't find the... Oh my god, it says I can't find the track list. Well, that's criminal. I guess, again, I'm already here, so I might as well just check in my DJ mixes. So give me one moment. I suppose this is a little indulgent, but let's see. This is the opening. Oh yeah.
Hey, I say something. Who are you?
And it's a sample set from The Master, a show I'm quite fond of.
An outsider.
Yep, so definitely it's the opening tune, this version of my mix, The Juggernaut, and as I said, one of the versions is in those other sets I mentioned, all of which I think are up on YouTube. In any case, let me know what you think of the track. Shout out to Mark and to Choci, shout out to the Choci's Chewns label in general, and within the next week or two I'll try to come back and react to the other side. I know there's some other tracks in the trance, acid trance realm that I still have alternate versions to go through. I remember, you know, this is more progressive trance, but I did 2 of the versions of Cascade Transcend, I want to say, maybe just one of the versions. But the point is, you know, I'm aware there's some outstanding other mixes that I have to react to. So, you know, I'm cataloging these. I will try to get to all of them in due time. Let me know what you think of this, and I will see you for the next one. Peace.